We have pharmacists recommending to consumers that they should change their insurance plan for the betterment of the pharmacist?
No, that is not addressed in this bill. However,
well, you just said that, though.
No,
Mr. Jensen.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Let her answer the question.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
And remember, we're not on the corner.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to a bonus episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in state government. We're bringing you some extra content this week because I went really long with Democratic operative Bradley Honan, CEO and president of the Honan Strategy Group, and we're going to break up our conversation into two parts. Later in the week, when we normally drop dispatches, we'll share the rest of our conversation where we analyze his claim that power is becoming more decentralized in Albany, a theory that seems completely misguided to me, but it's possible I'm too close to the state government to see the larger trends that are happening. But that's for the upcoming regular episode, so here is our bonus conversation with Bradley Honan. I want to talk about a developing story and get your take on an issue that combines politics and government, which is the possibility that the state legislature, at the urging of congressional Democrats, will mess with the state's special election calendar to try to extend how long Congresswoman Elise Stefanik's North Country seat might be left open after she becomes UN ambassador. In response to reporting about this possibility, it seems like her appointment might be delayed until April, making any election calendar changes kind of a moot point. But I'm curious if you think there would have been a downside to Democrats in the state legislature if they did decide to tweak with the calendar to try to sow discord in the House of Representatives, where Republicans have a very slim majority.
The reality of that particular seat in terms of the makeup, the geographic composition of the seat, is it's a Republican seat. And whether the election is held today, tomorrow, in 200 days or 400 days, as I think the governor alluded to the other day happens in other states, a Republican will win the seat.
Yeah.
What we have found in our polling and our analytics work is that voters have very little tolerance for playing games around how people are elected, how districts are drawn. So I think if Democrats go forward and play games with this, they're delaying the inevitable, which is a Republican will win.
So you made the case that voters don't like when lawmakers mess with the administration of elections. But I remember talking with one of my colleagues at the Capitol back in 2022 when Democrats updated election laws to essentially get Brian Benjamin off the ballot and get Antonio Delgado on the ballot. And he thought this would be an issue a few months later that Republicans would try to make hay of, since they were holding press conferences and putting out press releases opposing the change, kind of like what we saw in the aftermath of the reporting that Democrats were considering changing the special election calendar now. Ultimately, though, this wasn't one of the top 5, 10, 15 issues that Republicans raised in the 2022 elections. So do you really think that more than a year from now, Democrats would pay a price for impacting the special election calendar in the 21st Congressional District outside of the 21st Congressional District? Do you think voters elsewhere would give two farts about the special election calendars being changed?
Kathy Hochul is either going to lose a Democratic primary or lose a general election to a Republican without a massive reset. We heard her talk about affordability.
Right, but the question I asked, though, do you actually think that something that's so in the weeds as an election calendar change is something that voters will care about when there are so many other quote-unquote kitchen table issues that people will campaign on?
Dave, that's precisely my point. Kathy Hochul today is not able to drive her message about what she's doing to address affordability and crime because we are caught up discussing whether we're going to move the dates of a special election for a member of Congress.
We were talking about it right now, but a year from now, do you think we're going to be talking about it? When people weren't talking about Delgado getting on the ballot even a few months later.
The Siena poll yesterday says that there are grave warning signs for Democrats in one of the bluest states of the Union. The biggest state that moved to Donald Trump in the past presidential election was New York State. In my neighborhood of the Upper West Side, there was a big swing to Donald Trump. So any discussion that is not about what Governor Hochul is trying to do, which is press the reset button into the mechanics of a special election, and this is getting covered, it seems, quite a bit these days, I would argue is a missed opportunity for her to continue to hit the reset button. I understand, and I'm as horrified as anybody by what's going on in Washington, and I'm struggling to figure out what's being done by Democrats to resist this. Playing games with the date of a special election, if that's the best knife, if you will, in our arsenal, we're in for a very, very long 4 years. You've got to litigate the Democratic position every day aggressively, and right now, based on our discussion, Democrats are on the defensive about an issue that doesn't have popular support among voters. All it does is it sears into people's minds that Hochul doesn't get it. Hochul doesn't understand what she said a couple of weeks ago, which is people care about affordability. That's in all the polling. People care about public safety. That's in all the polling. So she needs to drive that message consistently. And to me, this seems like a terrible distraction where Democrats are leading with an issue where the public is not behind us, they're against us.
Well, turning to another issue, earlier this week you made some news releasing a poll confirming what other public polling has found and kind of expanding on it, which is that Andrew Cuomo is potentially well-positioned to win a Democratic primary for mayor of New York City. And you followed up that survey of voters with an op-ed in the Daily News making the case that the former governor is the front-runner in this race. The piece notes at the end that you and your office aren't currently working for any candidates in the race. Maybe I'm a little cynical, but this all reads like a job application to a future Cuomo campaign or a Cuomo super PAC. So what was it that prompted you guys to spend money on something like this?
Sure, absolutely. Let me give you some context. We, over the course of the 7 or 8 years that my firm has been in existence, we have done a series of public release surveys. We got a lot of attention for what we did with Maury Litwack and the Orthodox Union, and we were very clear about who the client was in that case. This was Honan Strategy, polling on behalf of Maury's organization. Right. And we have done, and we will continue to do, polling that is in the public interest. And that's what we did with this poll. We are the client. We're not working on behalf of anybody. I paid for this out of my own pocket. Our firm is in a financial position that we can take on the expense of doing a survey like that. I would say what spiked after the November election is we started getting wave after wave of questions from people in New York City, from people here in Albany, and even people in Washington about a municipal race coming up, a primary race for a municipal election in New York City. New York City is pretty important, but we're fielding questions actually from around the country and even from international reporters. This has become a national and an international story with the election of Donald Trump. And we're in the business of not telling people what's in our gut, but going out and quantifying data about what's out there. One of the things that we did that was different about our survey, Dave, is a deep, deep analysis of past election returns and the composition of the electorate. And what is undeniably clear statistically is that a Republican president, particularly a Republican president named Donald Trump, causes the Democratic primary vote to surge. And the composition of the electorate, by a range of different variables, gender, ethnicity, political ideology, changes pretty considerably. So we're not just polling registered voters, we're polling people from the New York City Board of Election voter file that have been verified to vote in an election based on their past primary history. We have also sampled anti-Trump surge voters who are not the prime voters, but many of them have registered to vote in the last year. we didn't poll this other group, but there are people here today who have not yet registered to vote, who are going to be animated and activated by Donald Trump being on the ballot, and they're going to cast a vote perhaps for the first time ever, and maybe a primary ballot for the first time ever. So what our polling actually shows is we are showing Socialist Assembly member Zoran Mondami doing twice as well as the other polls. We show candidates like Brad Lander in a position higher than the mayor. So Zoran Mondami is using our poll that I paid for to show that his viability is much stronger than anyone else thinks. I haven't seen it, but apparently Brad Lander is using our poll to increase his own public visibility, and apparently, I can't confirm this because I haven't seen it, Dave, he's using it to raise money. And he's welcome to do that. We are not trying to prop up or pull down Zoran or any other candidate. We wanted to examine the issues. We've gotten a lot of questions about the mayor's race, and we wanted to look at it much more in depth in terms of the mood of voters, in terms of how the candidates are positioned on issues, to be able to run a ranked choice voting simulation. None of the other polls have done that. And so we wanted to do this really honestly, by ourselves, not working for any candidate, no prospective candidate, no committee, no prospective committee, because we owe it to our clients. We owe it, frankly, to the public interest. I don't want to be too high and mighty to go and look at the race right now. There's another poll that's coming out in a few days that shows largely the same results for the top line candidate. Cuomo's in the lead. I don't think it shows as well for a candidate like Mondami, but again, I think that comes back to the sampling.
So you mentioned that this poll takes a look at the ranked choice issue, and a lot of the polls that we talk about here are focused on state races where we don't have that type of election model. So what goes into determining something like Cuomo will achieve 58% of the vote and would win in the sixth round of voting, and incumbent Mayor Eric Adams is eliminated as a candidate after the fifth round of ranked choice voting? I have to imagine this is much more involved than the traditional polling questions.
That's exactly right. Look, I don't want to sit here and say I'm any better than anybody else, but the system of voting in June in New York City, which is different than the election taking place for mayor in Albany, is a system of voting exists called ranked choice voting, where it's not just your primary candidate that you're choosing, but you have to provide your second and your third and your fourth and even your fifth choice candidate in your ballot. Not everybody does, but that's what you're allowed to do. And so what our simulation does is it takes people through that system. And the candidates, for example, like Whitney Tilson and Jim Walden and Michael Blake, who are knocked out very early in the ranked choice voting, their votes get reallocated to the other candidates.
But in terms of how you do this, are the people that you're polling, are they proactively saying, my number one is this, my number two is this, or do you have to offer them suggestions because maybe at this point people don't even know who their possible choices are?
We take them through exactly what you're describing. Dave, who is your first choice? And we give them 10 choices.
Okay.
Let's say your choice is Whitney Tilson. The next question I'll ask you is, who is your second choice? But I'm going to ask, instead of 10 question choices, only 9.
Right. This might be the first time some of these people ever heard the name Whitney Tilson.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And Whitney Tilson doesn't have a lot of votes to reallocate in the second and the subsequent rounds, so there's not a lot of movement in the first couple of rounds of this. So we take people through asking them, who is your first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, fifth choice, where we're eliminating, and the choice of candidates gets smaller and smaller. Your list of candidates is going to be different than somebody else's because who you're selecting, 1, 2, 3, is different maybe than the other person that we survey. So we have to take time to do this. It takes time, expense, and expertise. But again, that's the system that is taking place in June. And so to accurately measure the race requires taking that kind of rigor with a methodology. We didn't want to just look at the ballot. We didn't even just want to look at the ranked choice voting simulation. We also wanted to examine the issues, because the issues really, really matter. And I hope the reporters and I hope the people covering the race really focus on the issues, because voters are crying out that they are very worried, fearful, and anxious is how I characterize this in our materials, about where we are today and where we're going in the future. And what we found is, beyond just a superficial name recognition advantage that both Adams and former Governor Cuomo had if he enters the race, is Cuomo is dominating on the discussion of the issues. We asked most of the candidates, we didn't ask this of Blake and Tilson and Walden, but of the other candidates, who's going to fix the MTA? Who's going to fight crime, the overarching issue? And what I think represents a serious hill for Eric Adams to climb as a former cop who arguably came into office on a platform of fighting crime, he's only about 1 out of 10 voters think he's the right candidate to address crime. Standing up to Donald Trump, 1%, Dave, 1% of the whole city electorate thinks that Eric Adams is the best candidate to stand up to Donald Trump. And he's looming over this race in such a big way. And for Adams to be so close to him, I've called akin to dancing with the devil here in the minds of Democratic primary voters. So we've looked at the race, I think, in enormous detail with a great deal of sophistication about who's going to turn out and what does that surge electorate look like. And if Zoran Mandami wants to raise money off of what we've done, he's welcome to do that. But my job here is to administer truth serum and be a truth teller. And the data is very clear that the progressive lane within the primary is growing. I don't think Mandami is going to be mayor, but he's going to overperform expectations.
Well, yeah, you talk about the progressive lane, and I have to imagine as progressives see polls like yours and other that show Cuomo in a strong position, they're having some sort of nightmares about 2021 where the progressive movement did not really consolidate around one candidate, and Eric Adams, one of the more conservative candidates in the field, emerged with a Democratic primary nomination. How would you advise these candidates who are, say, to the left of Andrew Cuomo, to the left of Eric Adams, and are looking to fill that lane? Should they be focusing their attention on Governor Andrew Cuomo? Should they be focusing on the other candidates who maybe have more in common with their portfolio of ideas and biography? How do you choose what to focus on?
Yeah, it's a very important question, I think, to focus on. And I would say that one of the things that's very instructive about the 21 race, the first time that New York City had a chance to go through ranked choice voting.
Because we had the special election with Jumaane Williams, the jungle ranked choice voting experience.
That's exactly 19 candidates or something, some huge number like that. Here's what I think is very instructive and important to answer your question about the progressive lane. The challenge is that most voters are totally befuddled by what we're talking about right now. The City Board of Elections has not done a great job of educating people about this system.
Wait. The New York City Board of Elections hasn't done a good job about something?
Shocking.
You're really out on a ledge here.
News flash here. Yeah, I better back myself up. The smart and sophisticated people that you have on your show that we talk to are also pretty flummoxed about how to run and win in the context of ranked choice voting. I think one of the clear lessons from across the country, and we've done a lot of research in other places that have, frankly, more experience than ranked choice voting. The number one thing you can do to harm yourself is go attack another candidate. And so the challenge that I think the progressives are going to have with Cuomo as far out as he is right now, the natural choice in a binary election would go attack, attack, attack. The problem is when he's getting almost 6 out of 10 votes by the end of the ranked choice voting simulation, that's an awful lot of votes. And trashing their candidate it's going to make it hard for voters to come over into your camp. So I think that's a bit of a brick wall question that I think they're struggling with. The other thing that I think is fascinating and underreported, and it bears a lot more examination. I'm going to say this to you, Dave. Eric Adams did not win the June primary in 2021. Maya Wiley's campaign lost it for him.
They imploded, so to speak.
They imploded, and here's what happened. The Wiley voters, Adams won the 8th round by 71 or 7,200 votes. Okay? He was elected mayor. He was elected Democratic nominee, which is basically being elected mayor, by less than 10,000 votes. Here's what happened in the round where Wiley's voters got eliminated. They disproportionately voted for Garcia over Adams, which makes sense to your point about the ideological lanes. Mm-hmm. The problem was a lot of them didn't vote in all the 5 choices that they were given. Mm-hmm. And if Wiley's voters, who were declared inactive in that last round, had cast all 5 rounds of voting ballots and voted in the same proportion as the other Maya Wiley voters, Catherine Garcia would be the mayor today. Maya Wiley had the ability to elect Catherine Garcia. They didn't figure out how the system worked well enough, and they didn't spend enough time thinking through the strategy of how they were going to carry on their political voices. And I think that's one of the most underreported stories. Again, I don't think Eric Adams ran a particularly good or sophisticated campaign, but he did a little bit better than Wiley, who ran a substantially less campaign. Her inactive ballots, in the same ratio as the ones that were active, would have elected Catherine Garcia. And I think that's a part of the basic arithmetic that many sophisticated people are simply not aware of. And I hear this, frankly, even from candidates in some of the open seats for the city council, where there's many candidates, and ranked choice voting is going to be decisive in determining who the winner is.
Well, it seems then that the takeaway for the more progressive candidates in the mayoral field, whether it's state lawmakers like Ramos, Myrie, Mamdani, is that they need to instruct their voters, based on your premise, to fill out that entire sheet of candidates and just make sure you don't put Eric Adams on it. Or Andrew Cuomo.
Let's go look back to 2021 and what happened. Andrew Yang did that somewhat aggressively. He and Garcia would campaign together, and he would instruct them along the lines of what you are describing. Garcia didn't fully internalize how important that was. And I think, again, many of the candidates who are running, I think, has Stringer been in office since 92?
Basically my whole life.
So he is used to, I'm not trying to disparage Scott Stringer, but a lot of these candidates build muscle memory around how to run and win often binary races that aren't particularly competitive, where ranked choice voting is not relevant. Right. That's been 99% of Scott Stringer's experience. When he ran 4 years ago, I think he achieved, as citywide comptroller, he achieved 6% of the vote. Citywide office holder got 6% of the vote. We show him doing a little bit better, but not by much. I think there's not, Dave, frankly, the muscle memory of elected officials that is outside of the context of first past the post. And I think they're struggling with it. When I talk to candidates, they don't fully understand it. And there are strategies for how you run, whether you're in the center, where you're in the left, whether you're on the right, that come down to very basic arithmetic. It rewards candidates that have broad bases. It rewards candidates that have these alliances. And it really works against candidates that are throwing mud. Those are the pretty clear conclusions again and again. I guess the fourth one, coming back to the Board of Elections, is people are awfully confused. And this is a discussion maybe, Dave, for another day. But when we've done analysis in different parts of the city, this maybe is a negative unintended consequence of ranked choice voting. Typically, lower income, less affluent, less well-educated parts of New York City don't go as many rounds in ranked choice voting as do more affluent, well-educated areas. There's a substantial difference from parts of the South Bronx to Riverdale in terms of how many invalid ballots there are. And again, I guess I'm going to come and stand on my soapbox and say I think that if we're going to have this system, we have to do a much, much better job of educating voters, because I think, frankly, we're disenfranchising lower-income voters of color. I don't think that was the intent.
Is that synonymous with just low information voters?
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases it is. And again, we're not talking about a U.S. presidential election that's going to have a lot of attention and a lot of coverage. And I'd really want to put a plug in for saying that I think that the election board has to do a much, much better job. And frankly, what we are advising candidates is that it's not just about selling your platform and your message to voters. You have to mechanically educate people about how this system works and where you want them to go in this process, which is convoluted. Most of the voters in New York City who are going to cast a ballot do not have a college education. That's news sometimes to reporters who are all college and graduate school educated.
Living in our bubble.
Living in the bubble in certain parts of the city. Journalists do very, very important work. But I think it's important that they get out on the street and they hear from voters. And what they find is most voters don't live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan or Park Slope or Brooklyn Heights. And the vast majority of them are not college educated. And what the polling says again and again is they are drowning and they are asking for a proverbial life raft. And that comes through again and again and again in so many different questions that we look at and analyze. And when you confront them with something like ranked choice voting, it's just not something that they intuitively understand or strategically know how to use it to support the candidate that they're most behind.
And that was our bonus conversation with Bradley Honan, CEO and president of the Honan Strategy Group. Tune in for our regular episode of Dispatch in Planet Albany, when we will analyze his argument that power in Planet Albany is becoming more decentralized. Thanks for listening. Podcast adjourned.